Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Haynes. Tonight on Greater Boston, criminal charges appear imminent in the hush money case against Donald Trump. Two high-profile criminal defense lawyers join me on what we can expect out of this case and what this will mean for the former president's re-election campaign. Then, close calls in the air and on the tarmac this year have eyes on the flight safety. A flight attendant and a pilot join me on the dangers they face and how we can feel safe flying. After years upon years of allegations, hearings, and investigations on a whole slew of legal issues, it looks like criminal charges are now about to finally catch up with Donald Trump. Prosecutors in New York are expected to indict the former president in the next couple of weeks over hush money payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office has reportedly invited Trump to testify before a grand jury in this case, a step prosecutors are required to take before making indictments in that state, and is typically the last step before criminal charges are filed. The former president and his attorneys have not yet responded to this invitation, but legal experts across the board expect him to turn it down.
Knowing Donald as well as I do, understand that he doesn't tell the truth. It's one thing to turn around and to lie on your untruth social. It's another thing to turn around and lie before a grand jury. So I don't suspect that he's going to be coming.
So the case centers around a $130,000 payment made to Daniels in late October of 2016 to keep her quiet about an alleged affair she had with Trump a decade earlier. Trump has denied having this affair. He also denied having knowledge of the hush money payment, which his former attorney, Michael Cohen, the man we just heard from, and admitted to paying on his behalf. But Cohen, who spent 3 years in prison in part for his role in this scheme, testified that Trump directed him to pay off Daniels, and to prove it, he publicly shared one of several personal checks addressed to him and signed by Trump while he was in the White House. For Trump's part, he's taking to Truth Social to call out the Manhattan District Attorney, calling this case a witch hunt. Here's how the DA responded on MSNBC.
We follow the facts. Doesn't matter what party you are, doesn't matter your background. What did you do, and what does the law say?
All right, I'm joined now by a couple of experts on what the law says here. Ron Sullivan, a Harvard law professor and director of the Criminal Justice Institute at Harvard, and former Assistant U.S. Attorney Dan Small, now a partner at Holland and Knight. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal.
So I want to start with this Trump testifying. Do you all believe that he will testify in this Manhattan case?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I love both the concurrence. You're all like, no.
I echo Sully. You have to understand that Trump gave a deposition in a civil case brought by the New York AG, and he refused to answer questions based on the Fifth Amendment 400 times. So the chances that he's going to waltz into a grand jury and do anything different are non-existent. He's not coming.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 100%. It's simply not in his interest to do it at this point. The prosecutor's office, when they've gotten to this stage, they've decided that they want to indict. They've decided that he's guilty of something, and coming in and putting testimony under oath is only going to inure to the detriment of any defendant, and for a particularly what I suspect to be hard to control client like Donald Trump, it would be a disaster for him to go under oath before a grand jury.
And Dan, we've been, we mentioned this in the setup here, years upon years of allegations here, and it seems like this is now playing out in Manhattan.
Well, it is kind of odd of all the investigations going on, the January 6th investigation, the big ripoff that the January 6th committee talked about, and the false election claims. This doesn't feel like what should be the first one or the most important one, but that's not the way this works. It works, whoever has the evidence and brings the case, has the evidence and brings the case. So if this is the first one, we'll have to see where it goes.
And Ron, do you think that then, as we bring this case and as this plays out, other cases will then start moving more quickly than they have in the past?
I tend to think so, not necessarily because of this case, but I do think that the investigations are just, all of them seem to be approaching the end stage. So, the dominoes are just going to start falling one after another. I agree with Dan. We'll just have to see how this plays out. But I do suspect there will be one or two more indictments in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize that we're approaching 2024, and no prosecutor wants to indict a political candidate in an election year. They really have to make the decision within the next 7 months, or they will be much more susceptible to charges of being political.
Now, why is that? Why wouldn't you want to indict a candidate that's running for president?
Because any candidate is going to go ahead.
Yeah, it's a long-standing norm, and I think a good one and a right one among prosecutors' offices, that you don't want to indict a sitting candidate. The prosecutor is supposed to be a minister of justice, beyond politics, fair, going where the facts lead them. Fairness exists in our system on two registers, both actual fairness and also the appearance of fairness. And the problem with indicting a politician during an election year is that the office would be subject to claims that they don't appear to be fair, that they're trying to put a thumb on the scale of the election. So you want actual fairness, but you also want the appearance of fairness. So prosecutors avoid indicting, even if they think they have the evidence during an election year, so as not to interfere with the democratic process.
And Dan, we have this check. We have what I imagine is Stormy Daniels' testimony, or at least a deposition. We have Michael Cohen and his conviction. I mean, what do you think the success of this case in Manhattan is going to be?
This is a tough case, both on the facts and on the law. On the law, you're looking at a rather new idea that falsifying records in support of a campaign finance or a tax violation is a crime, and that hasn't been tested that much. And on the facts, look, Michael Cohen has lied. He pled guilty to crimes. Stormy Daniels has admitted that she lied. These are not the world's greatest witnesses, and you have to wonder whether the district attorney is moving forward now because he's obtained other evidence. Now, for example, the CFO, Alan Weisselberg, of the Trump organization, is sitting in jail now and may well have decided that jail is not where he wants to be, and maybe he could free himself sooner by cooperating. So you have to wonder if there's something else going on that we don't know about yet.
Ron, what do you think about this case here?
Yeah, I agree. So on the one hand, these sorts of cases are easy for prosecutors because you have things like physical canceled checks. Right, you have evidence that it's there. It's a sort of tangible evidence, banking records that it's very hard to argue with. But here, as Dan was pointing out, what's relevant here is the intent the actor had with executing the check, or even if the actor, Donald Trump, knew that the thing was being executed. So I am sure that he'll be able to bring in a ton of evidence to say, I don't write checks. I'm a multi-billionaire. I have accountants who do that sort of stuff. I don't know what they're doing half the time. I imagine that it'll be difficult in that sense because they have to prove, one, that Trump knew about it, two, that Trump intended an illegal purpose by doing it. And that's going to be the tough part. There may be more evidence, probably is. These prosecutors tend not to indict unless they've got some pretty strong evidence. At least they think they have pretty strong evidence. So we shall see.
Dan, I have a thought about, you had mentioned that Donald Trump may not be the easiest client to deal with or to manage. Now we're talking about ramping up for a re-election campaign that seems to already be in full swing for the former president. How difficult is it as an attorney, especially as a defense attorney in this case, to try to defend, Donald Trump on the campaign trail and Donald Trump in a courtroom?
Well, as I think you know, Crystal, I've represented several governors and other high-level political figures, and that's not the right environment for being in court. They are people who are used to speaking their mind and speaking it early and often. And as you said in your lead-in, Trump is already calling the investigation a witch hunt and all this sort of thing, and would be virtually impossible to control on the witness stand. And so it's a high-risk enterprise on both sides.
Ron, how would you, I guess, I don't know if control is the word, but at least try to manage a client like that?
I think control is the right word. And I, too, have represented my share of politicians, and they have made a livelihood on being able to convince people about things by talking. And that skill is oftentimes not the best skill in a court of law. So I think what you have to do is convince them to trust you. That's number one. If the client trusts you, then you're able to say to the client, these are the things that we have to do if you want a chance at an acquittal. If you don't do these things, in my 25 years experience in trying cases, you will be convicted and go to jail. We call that a come to Jesus speech. And oftentimes a client will pull the line and say, this is what I need to do. But the start of it is trust. That might sound a little hokey, but you really have to earn the client's trust. If you do that, then you've got the best chance of controlling or managing, whichever verb you want to use, the client.
Dan, I'm thoughtful about, as this case plays out, will attorneys on the January 6th committee be watching this very closely, and what will they be watching it for?
Well, they're watching for that. They will be watching it, of course, although those are different cases. But they're watching it for what Trump is going to say, what he's going to talk about, and also, as I said before, who else is out there that might be able to provide testimony. If the CFO, a lot of speculation about whether the CFO is talking. If he's talking, that could have a lot of implications, and implications for the larger case about valuations, implications for the campaign denial case, and also implications. Remember, Trump raised $250 million right after the election based on send me money so we can undo this terrible thing that they've done, and then never use that money to undo anything. So there's a wire fraud case or some kind of a fraud case there that I'm sure the special counsel is looking at. So everyone's looking to see what else is out there and what shoe is going to drop next.
Ron, your thoughts here in the last minute or so.
Oh, just to pick up on where you left off, that's actually the case I thought would be indicted first, the special counsel case. He's been moving at breakneck speed, so I really expected an indictment to come there first. But I think that is going to be the next shoe that drops. Once again, he has subpoenaed almost everybody you can think of, so they are nearing the end of that investigation as well. And I think that's the tougher one for Mr. Trump.
All right, well, gentlemen, we will be watching, as I'm sure you will be as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Good to see you, Dan.
You too, Sully.
Next up, a look at the growing fear about flying safely after some scary moments in the sky in the past few weeks. That includes an attack by a Leominster man on a Boston-bound plane. Francisco Severo Torres is now facing life in prison after threatening a flight attendant and then charging at her and hitting her with a metal spoon. Just one day later, two planes clipped wings on the tarmac at Logan Airport. And less than a week before both of those instances, there was another close call at Logan where a plane took off without clearance, forcing a nearby plane that was landing to head back up into the air. No one was hurt in either case, and that comes after a series of familiar airport accidents in recent months. We're talking about Texas, New York, California, and Hawaii, all of which have prompted the head of the Federal Aviation Administration to call for a safety summit. And as for the cases of on-flight violence and aggression, well, those have been on the rise since the pandemic began, with nearly 2,500 unruly passenger reports to the FAA last year alone. It was one of the worst years on record, though still a major decline from 2021, which saw nearly 6,000 complaints. So how concerned should we really be right now? And what needs to happen to keep crews and passengers safe in the skies? Well, we're going to break it down. Joining me to discuss this are Taisha Best, a flight attendant and president of Transit Workers Union Local 579, and Patrick Smith, an airline pilot, air travel blogger, and author of the website Ask a Pilot. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So, Taisha, I want to start with you. Talk to me about what the experience has been for flight attendants when we're talking about statistics in instances like these.
So basically, the problem is our operations has been experiencing numerous delays or cancellations. JetBlue having 30% delay rates right now, year over year. And what occurs is our customers just come on the plane frustrated, and they seem to be using airline workers as a punching bag. And so last year, the TW really championed and launched an Assault Won't Fly national campaign to bring awareness to these ongoing issues regarding customers being unruly and disruptive, both in the air and on the ground.
Patrick, you know, you've been blogging about these situations. What do you find has been, if you can think about it, a common denominator, if there is one?
Well, going back to your intro, I think we're conflating two very different issues here, two different subjects. We're talking about air safety, generally speaking, and we're talking about what we used to call air rage, people becoming violent and unruly on planes. That is not a new phenomenon. I think the raw numbers of air rage incidents are up, but it would be interesting to look at them proportionally. And by that, I mean, there are a lot more people flying now. I think it's somewhere around 3 million people a day worldwide. So, you know, honestly, when you consider the stresses of flying, the noise, the crowds, and then when you introduce alcohol into the mix, I'm surprised in some ways we don't see more of these incidents. And part of it, too, I think, is that the demographics, for lack of a better term, of flying have changed so much. In the old days, you know, air travel was seen as something dignified and something special, something not everybody did, mostly because they couldn't afford it in the old days. And now it's something we just take for granted. It's like getting on a bus. We're not really expecting, or we're not expected to be on our best behavior the way we once were. That doesn't excuse what people are doing when it becomes violent. But I think that's the progression, and that's one of the reasons this is happening. Now, this is all very different from the other part of the subject here, which is just air safety generally, and the incidents we saw, like the one at Logan and elsewhere around the country.
So let's talk about air safety then. What accounts for some of these near misses? We're talking about planes clipping each other and things like that. Is it a lack of training? Is it hours in the air? What is it?
Yeah, I don't necessarily see these incidents, even though there has been a number of them lately, as symptomatic of some dysfunction. In a lot of ways, and this is going to sound strange, to me, they actually serve to underscore just how safe flying is. And by that, I mean, when you go back through the air travel annals, you know, you don't see the number of very serious, catastrophic aviation accidents like we used to see in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even into the 2000s when we had multiple major accidents every year around the world. Nowadays, one or two is a lot. And so when even minor incidents happen, the media tends to seize on them and spin them up, and they become the focus of attention, which unfortunately gives people the idea that flying is becoming more dangerous when really just the opposite is true. Statistically, we've never been safer than we are right now. In 1985, just to pick a year, there were 27 major aviation disasters around the world. 27 in 1 year. I mean, that was a bad year, granted, but we would have 1, 2, 3, 5 sometimes every year. And now, like I said, 1 or 2 is a lot. So there's a lot of focus on even minor incidents now because we don't have the big ones to talk about.
Well, if there are minor, and Taisha, I do have some questions for you as well, but if they are minor, then why would the FAA have a safety summit? Well,
I mean, once you establish a paradigm like we have now, where flying is so incredibly safe, you want to keep it that way. And it's good that these incidents cause us to be proactive and to look for breakdowns in the safety chain to keep us as safe as we are. And I think that's the focus of the safety summit. I could be wrong. These things could be symptomatic in some way of something kind of going wrong in the system, but it's good that it's coming out like this and not in the form of a major crash.
And Taisha, I know that. Oh yes, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I definitely would like to add to that. We just recently had air traffic control shut down for several hours in the morning, which disrupted customers being able to get to and from their homes and their other destinations on time. So when we talk about there's less of, yes, that could be true. However, we are seeing more antiquated system issues, degradations of the operations regarding the ability of flights to take off on time and land on time. So when we talk about safety, we also need to talk about, are we upgrading our systems? It's not just about training. We can train and put someone in front of a computer, but if that computer is still outdated, then they are not keeping up with higher numbers of customers. So as the customer number gets higher, then we also need to ensure that our operations and operational systems are also being updated as well.
Right, because we are selling the tickets to the customers. And so if we're going to be selling a lot of tickets, we have to make sure that they have a safe flight. Taisha, I want to ask you, as we talk about this safety summit, I know that flight attendants have been active and vocal about concerns in the sky for their safety. And what are some of the things that specifically, the Transit Workers Union wants to say?
So in terms of TWU, what we are calling for better training for our airline workers. We need real life type situational training regarding customer disruption and unruly behavior. We don't have that detailed training that would allow for us to act quickly, dismantle and disarm any unruly, aggressive passengers. We also would like to talk about the fact that we were really championing the Protection from Abusive Passengers Act, which is a bill that should be reintroduced on the floor very soon. We're uplifting that because that would allow for, if a customer is unruly on one plane, that act will ban them from the next day getting on another plane and possibly repeating that unruly situation. What we need is accountability. And what we want is our companies to be held accountable regarding this mismanagement of flight delays and cancellations, which is having our customers being very frustrated and angry, and in turn taking it out on airline employees when, in fact, it wasn't our problem that the flights are being canceled and delayed. It's due to just understaffing and just poor operational needs.
Patrick, what do you think needs to come out of this safety summit from your perspective?
Well, Taisha just made a good point. The fact that our air traffic control system is outdated and outmoded, I mean, that's no secret. That doesn't equate to it being unsafe, but there are changes that we need to make. I mean, that's simply not a question. But in the meantime, you have airlines themselves in an operational state right now that is maybe not quite where it should be. So we have a lot of delays. We have a lot of logistical problems, cancellations, delays that are both traffic related and related to understaffing and personnel shortages and so on at the airlines. And these things are all kind of coming together to create frustration levels that are above and beyond where they were pre-pandemic. And, you know, when I started writing and blogging about the air travel business, one of the things I've learned after years of doing it is never underestimate people's contempt for the airlines. Some of that is earned, a lot of it is not, but it does result in people just being aggravated and frustrated when they get to the airport. And in a lot of ways, flying brings out the worst in people.
And so, Taisha, I guess what would your message be to passengers? You know, I'm thinking about spring break coming up, and I'm thinking about people being, you know, on planes and traveling places. I guess what would be your message to folks who are getting on a plane for spring break?
So we are happy to take you home and take you to your vacation destination. We are asking that you respect our deliverables when we ask you to remain seated, put your seatbelt on. We ask you to not overserve yourself on alcohol before stepping on the planes. It's really hard to have an inebriated customer in the air. We're in a metal plane going so fast, and to be able to have a very quick response when someone chooses to be unruly and disruptive, that is a choice. And we're asking you all to make better choices. If you are having anxiety about flying, please make sure that you get the right resources and tools in order to combat that. And if you're frustrated, please just know we are also frustrated. We are also waiting for an aircraft to arrive so that we can take you home or take you to Los Cabos. We are also wanting to go to our own layovers and get our rest so that we can be able to be not fatigued working the next day. Our airline workers are also fatigued just like customers are. Mm-hmm. We are also frustrated just like customers are. We as employees, though, are choosing to exercise grace and mercy on ourselves as well as our customers. And we ask the customers to do the same to us and refrain from putting their hands on us and threatening the lives of themselves and us as crew members.
All right, pack your patience and your manners. All right, I want to thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Crystal Haynes. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.
Welcome